Well, we're back with the program. Let's continue the conversation. About 10:30. We've got about 15 minutes to drill down a little bit further on the Treasury single account and the heat on banks. Oji, with him as a banking sector analyst, still with us here. Oji, let's keep the heat on.
Okay.
So the banks are the ones feeling the heat. Some estimates says 1.7 trillion naira will be a shift off the banking system. It looks like the banks now are in some form of trouble.
The Nigerian banks are not in any form of trouble. Some issues appear to be exaggerated, as it were. The total deposit in the banking system as of today could be somewhere around 17 trillion naira. And then we are looking at some amount of about 1.6 to 2 trillion naira of government fund that may likely leave the system. And mind you, this fund is not static. These funds come every month. There are funds that come and they move away because government, by its nature, is not in the business of keeping deposits. Government, by its nature, is in the business of providing services. As you get revenue through taxes, through oil receipts, and other sources of revenue for government, tariffs and so on, you bring them into the Treasury, and then you appropriate them into the economy, whereby salaries are paid, capital projects are executed, some debts are paid, and the monies flow back into this economy, assumedly to the private sector. So these funds that we're crying about are funds that come in and go, they come in again and they go. So it is nice if they come into the commercial banking system to help deepen and enrich the quantum of funds available
to the real economy. Yes.
All right, so that said, it would be nice to say that banks are going to lose some fund and they will cry over it. But the truth is that no baby loves to be weaned. If a baby is very happy with the mother's breast, enjoying that breast, at the point of weaning, the baby will cry. But that is good for the baby to grow into manhood. So, or adulthood, let me say it that way. So the point is that the financial system in Nigeria needs to be properly deepened. We are struggling with issue of financial inclusion, which is not yet at the level where the central bank would want it to be. And there's so much fund in the private sector that is outside the banking system. We need to capture all of that.
The banks need to get to the real business of banking.
Even the government funds we are crying about, they will stay in CBN for a while. CBN will still appropriate those funds to the appropriate ministries, and we want to see these projects being done. These funds cannot continue to sit down in the accounts of these ministries. Let the monies get, for now, of course, the TSA must not be run by the central bank. In many countries, maybe in New Zealand and a few other places, the thing is run in a way that some commercial bank is given the right to do that. Of course, there's a selection process
some portion,
but when you do that here, some political issues can come in. Which bank do you give it to? So for now,
we had an issue with that, something like that during Soludo's era. You remember?
Yeah. A few banks were selected to do clearing or do this and
to do
forex and all of that. But here we're looking at a single bank managing the funds or the Treasury or the federal government. So which bank do you give it to? So it's right to say, for now, let that thing sit in the central bank. Even though the issue, which I was going to raise later, is I hope the central bank has deepened its capacity to provide necessary retail banking transactional activities for these MDAs.
Yeah.
It's very important so that we don't see inefficiency in that area too. But that's CBN.
So this is something that, so central bank would also, no, it's not a headache, because if central bank doesn't manage it well, they will run a problem and another problem again.
Inefficiencies, redundancy, and operational blockages. I mean, how do I put it? Obstacles in these ministries, departments, and
because
agencies.
right now the money is flowing from the commercial banks into the central bank. Then this money have to find their way out again somehow, isn't it?
Yeah, the monies are meant to flow into the central bank.
Yes.
And then all these ministries, all the MDAs will now go to central bank to handle their transactions. I want to pay salaries. I want to pay contractors. Whether I'm doing that through electronic system or they need to use some platform. So the level of technological development in the financial system will help the operating of the TSA. If the central bank has all the architecture, technological architecture support efficient provision of transactional services to these MDAs, then we won't have anything to worry about. Otherwise, we're going to be seeing some complaints coming from these MDAs. That aside, like I was saying, it's important that we understand that banks, can survive without these funds. That's what I want to say. And again, as they struggle to live with this new situation, CBN has to find a way to ensure that these banks do not have, huge shock in trying to transit from this case of
multiple accounts to
TSA. So that has to be done. Okay. So for me, it's not going to be the end of any bank. The banks are going to survive it. Of course, when we worry about the bank, sometimes we worry, oh, the economy is so poor, things are going. You see the bank declaring even much better results.
Yeah,
and I think the central bank is also looking at the review of bank charges that has started sometime last 2 or 3 years, where COT, for example, is being phased out, and a few other bank charges are being curtailed. I think for some reasons, maybe including this TSA implementation, the central bank is now looking at how to review those policies. So you may see, maybe in the next few months, where some of the policies might be reversed, whereby the Commission on Turnover may not die as earlier expected. And a few other ways CBN had curtailed earnings of banks, as a way to force them to do real lending to the real sector and deepen financial intermediation and inclusion. Some of those may be reviewed. That's what I see happening. But at the end of the day, these policies, like the TSA, is good for the whole economy. If one sector of the economy, as important as it is, that financial sector, may have to adjust itself so that the overall interest of the whole economy, the banking sector, the oil and gas sector,
the SME,
manufacturing,
agriculture,
SME, agriculture,
infrastructure,
that we get things right that will positively impact the whole economy. While, of course, some funds, $1 trillion or 2 is lost in the financial sector, that's not going to cause their debt.
Yeah,
and of course, if the whole economy blossoms and prospers, the banks will gain in the medium to long term.
Yeah, because they definitely, because if you grow from 1.6 to about 3 trillion, for example, the money will still have to be paid to the banks,
yes.
And they take their commissions and charges at that point.
Yes.
So it's a win-win situation.
So it's a win-win situation for everybody.
Yes, it is. However, how do we get the banks to start chasing those monies outside the banking system?
Trust. Okay, I thought you said to start chasing the TSA accounts of, trust the banks.
No.
We're coming to that about the states. What we've discussed now is the TSA as it concerns the federal government.
Yes.
State governments also ought to. That's the policy direction of this current government. It's also important that state government begin to align themselves with that policy. Already, I think Akwa Ibom, Lagos State, and 1 or 2 other states are beginning to align themselves with that policy, in which case banks are already having a hot chase, for those TSA accounts of states. And it may be proper for me to mention here that it may not be nice, even though it's a free market, all right? It may not be nice to allow one bank, because of its strength and size, to capture, all the TSAs of the different states.
For example, Lagos.
Yeah.
For example,
Lagos, each state must have an account in one bank. That's
in one single bank.
In one single bank. If you want to implement TSA as it were. But what I'm saying is that if a bank holds Lagos State, the same bank holds FCT, the same bank holds a few other states, I'm thinking, the regulator will have to look more deeply about into this. I'm thinking it may not be nice in trying to handle the shock or the adverse effect of this policy at the state level and local government level. It may be nice to say, that's my mind, I'm thinking aloud, that no commercial bank in Nigeria should hold more than 2 state TSA accounts.
In a geopolitical zone?
Not, maybe in the whole country. Because all the banks are in the whole state. We have 24 banks, for example. We have 36 states and the federal capital territory. So we're saying, whether you are very strong, of course, almost all the banks today are national banks. We don't have any regional bank for now, except the merchant banks that just came up. But almost all commercial banks are now the only regional bank we had, that's the Heritage Bank, had just done a massive acquisition that has made it one of the top tier commercial banks. So we don't have any regional bank as it were now. So let all the TSAs of the states be somehow evenly distributed. Well, it depends on your own capability, your safety, your strength, what you offer the bank. So it may not be shared like it's competitive. You have to go for it. But CBN may guide to ensure that no bank,
there's no lopsided
so that the
arrangement.
Impact, because as this policy, comes in now, most banks that used to depend a lot on public funds will experience some shock.
So you think with the TSA, there's a little bit of a rearrangement, a realignment of the Nigerian banking industry?
Somehow, yes.
This is a bit of a major policy.
And that requires CBN to do some kind of scenario analysis and maybe stress testing, a new round of stress testing of banks to ascertain the level of impact this policy will have in them. We need to begin to act proactively, preventing failure and not solving emergencies when they occur. I think at this point, CBN needs to sit back and assess the financial system. This policy, what impact will it have, in the commercial banking system? And then how can we handle those, impacts? But I'm sure, while we're worried about short-term implications, the long-term effect of this policy is a huge plus for the economy.
The last question, which we will spend about a minute or two with the final, was how do we get banks? We're taking the milk from them. They need to go eat solid food. So they need to go out there and source funds from the real sector, from the real economy, taking a little bit of speculative, if you want to put it that way, treasury bills, free money from them. How do they get that on? It doesn't look like an easy business.
It's not easy, but that's why the banks are there. Banks are primarily, intermediaries between the surplus sector of the economy and deficit sector. So, of essence, they must be able to, use appropriate products, which they're doing, to get deposit from those who want to keep it in the bank. And they must be able to also understand the lending, practice. They must be able to lend the money effectively to those who need to borrow.
No, there's no problem with lending. People know how much they're taking loans. And I'm just cutting here. Nigerians want that you're taking my deposit. You're taking 14–15% from the federal government on treasury bills for 30 days. Hold on a minute. You're giving me 1% or 2% on my cash deposit.
Well, the interest rate is not very encouraging when you look at what banks offer. But that's also typical of the environment.
Even the single digit is not anything to write home about. I'm not sure anything, except for big companies who have cash.
The central bank has tried to handle this by saying, for example, that every bank must pay not anything less than 30% of the MPR on every savings account deposit. But if you crunch that figure, that will give you around 4%. MPR is currently at 13%.
Yes.
So assuming you give a customer 4% on the savings account, that customer's fund is growing at only 4%. The inflation is happening at 10%.
That's where we're going.
So
the conversation.
The real impact for you is the customer is having a negative interest on that deposit.
Yes. So if you're going to pay me anything on my deposit, I want something close to double digits because inflation is 9%. You're giving me 4%. I'm coming with a negative 5%. And you're taking 15% from the federal government via treasury bill.
Now, the other thing you haven't looked at is how much does it cost these banks to raise these deposits?
Okay, now that's a question mark. Let's hang it in there, Oju Demeze. Now we'll come to costs of bringing money in some other day. We would like to have you back.
Okay,
thank you very much. We appreciate your time. Banking sector analyst, Oju Demeze on the program.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we're going across after the break to Abuja, where Mohammed Bello Tokro is sitting to a pastoralist to give us his eye report to talk about Nigeria's history of violence of those doing business of livestock in Nigeria. Lives lost, lives damaged. And the economy is the worst for it. We're talking livestock business.